Why hasn't Justin Trudeau fired him? I don't ask that rhetorically, but specifically.
I have full confidence in Minister Morneau.
Minister Morneau said that he made a mistake and he apologized for it.
In accepting a trip worth more than what many Canadians earn as an annual salary, sorry doesn't cut it.
In these circumstances, he was able to show leadership and come up with some programs that we've never seen as a country.
I do think that people are losing the narrative here a little bit.
The minister should simply do the right thing, do the honorable thing, and resign now.
Welcome to Power and Politics. I'm Vashi Kapelos. As you heard there, the calls continue to mount for the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, to resign, and many of his colleagues are standing by him. Of course, this all has to do with what is now known as the We Charity controversy. That is the charity that was originally awarded an agreement worth nearly $1 billion to administer a volunteer student grant program. It became evident a number of weeks later that members of the Prime Minister's family, his mother and brother specifically, had been paid to the tune of nearly $300,000 for speaking events with the charity. It was also revealed that Bill Morneau's daughter worked for the charity. That's the Finance Minister. That's who we have been talking about. Yesterday, in testimony before the Finance Committee, Minister Morneau admitted to accepting travel worth about $41,000. He said he didn't realize that he hadn't paid for it and cut a check to the charity yesterday. The calls, as I said, though, continue for him to resign, and we've brought together 3 MPs from various parties to discuss those calls. First of all, from the Liberal Party, Adam van Koeverden. He's the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Youth. Michael Cooper is the Conservatives' Deputy Finance Critic. And Charlie Angus is the NDP's Ethics Critic. Hello to all 3 of you. Good to see you. Thank you very much for making time for our program tonight.
Thank you.
Mr. Van Koeverden, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind, and on those calls for the Finance Minister to resign. Do you stand by the Finance Minister, or do you think he should resign?
Absolutely, I stand beside and alongside my colleagues who, have total faith in Minister Bill Morneau. I accept his contrition. He was apologetic and clearly embarrassed by the statement yesterday. So yes, I have 100% faith in him.
Are you sympathetic, though, Mr. Van Koeverden, to Canadians who question how, at a time when millions of them are worried about even having a paycheck, the minister could simply forget that he essentially is indebted to this charity for $41,000 at a time when he also signed off on a decision to award them up to $43 million for a contract?
I'm as frustrated and annoyed as your average Canadian. I fielded calls and responded to emails today about it. And I understand, why people are a little bit frustrated. But I also saw that same frustration on the minister's face yesterday when he proactively cut a check and disclosed that he had made an error. And, it's incumbent upon all of us to realize and recognize that we all make mistakes. And he proactively made amends. So I'm glad that he did. And yes, absolutely, I stand by him.
Mr. Cooper, I know that your party has requested a second investigation based on the revelations yesterday through the Ethics Commissioner. Have you received a response to that request?
We have not received a response, but for the minister to say sorry is simply not good enough. We have a Minister of Finance who, by his own admission, has contravened at least 5 sections of the Conflict of Interest Act. We knew before yesterday's hearing that the minister had contravened sections 6 and 11 of the Act by failing to recuse himself from the decision to award this nearly $1 billion contribution to the We organization, an organization that employed one of his daughters and promoted another one of his daughters, including with respect to her book. But then we found out that he accepted $41,000 in illegal travel expenses. That is a clear breach of the Conflict of Interest Act. And for the finance minister to have not known, as he claims, is just not believable. Where did he
So you just don't believe, I just want to be clear, Mr. You don't believe there's any possibility that it was an oversight?
How does the minister explain $41,000 in travel, in food, in accommodation? Where did he think the money was coming from? And it's quite a coincidence, but he only seemed to discover this at the day that he appeared before the Finance Committee when he cut a check. It's unacceptable. The minister has breached the act. He's breached the trust of the office that he holds. And the only thing that is left for him to do is to do the honorable thing and resign, which Her Majesty's loyal opposition has called upon him to do.
Mr. Angus, is it impossible to believe that it was a mistake? I know I totally understand the point about $41,000. I certainly couldn't, not remember $41,000. But the minister was pretty explicit and repeated many times, the process by which he discovered it and the fact that he cut the check right after. Is it possible that it was an oversight?
Well, with Bill Morneau, it's certainly possible. I mean, this is a guy who forgot he had a villa in France. This is something that any other Canadian would never be able to be in a position to forget. But I think what really makes this damning was I asked him at Finance Committee a simple question. I asked him if he'd ever read the Conflict of Interest Act. And he seemed completely surprised by the question. He said, well, when I was elected, I was given all those acts. These aren't just documents you put away in your desk. These are the ruling guides that we are expected to follow. This is the law by which members of parliament work. So we have a finance minister in a government that is already, we have multiple investigations into the prime minister where he's been found guilty. With Bill Morneau now, we're looking at sections 4, 5, 6, 7, 11, possibly 12, possibly 14, section 21 of the act. We're going to have to write a whole new ethics code just for Bill. And what's disturbing here is he doesn't seem to think it's a problem. He thinks, well, geez, I'm really sorry, but, we paid for me to travel. We hired my daughter. I was dealing with while this $900 million deal went down. All of this is contrary to the law. And all of this is contrary to Canadians who, in a time of a pandemic and crisis, expect the government to put the people of the country and their needs first and not be making calls to their friends and not being the pack mule for the Kielburger Group. This is why I think Minister Morneau has badly, badly damaged his reputation with Canadians and badly damaged trust when we need to be able to trust government during this pandemic.
Are you calling on him to resign? Last night we had Mr. Julian, your colleague, on, and he was not yet ready to make that decision. He wanted more information.
What we want to do for the New Democrats is we need to get answers into how this $900 million boondoggle got through. Who were the key players? How is this going to be funneled through what we now learn is some kind of liability holding company? Bill Morneau, I think, has seriously damaged his reputation. We're going to wait to see what the ethics commissioner says. We want to get all the information. But I think Mr. Bill Morneau and the Liberals need to understand that they have a seriously, seriously damaged minister at a time when we need confidence.
Mr. Van Koeverden, I'll get you in 1 second, Mr. Cooper, I promise. I just want to get Mr. Van Koeverden in to respond to what both of you are saying. And I think what kind of cuts to the heart of it is certainly what my inbox is full of. And I take the point that the ministers are putting forth that they put a lot of programs forward, the government has so far, that have worked and benefited Canadians. This program in particular, that was the description for it as well, right? Helping out students. But at the end of the day, whether the intent was malicious or not, the connections are hard to dismiss, right? Like there's $41,000, there's $300,000 in speaking fees, and there was a contract that was ultimately, or an agreement, a contribution agreement that was ultimately awarded to an organization that so clearly has ties to people with decision-making authority. Like, do you understand how Canadians can have some doubt, Mr. Van Koeverden, about your government's ability to have their best interest at heart, not its own?
I understand the frustration. I totally do, but I don't think that Canadians share the resolve that my two colleagues have expressed with respect to any non-confidence in our government. We've helped millions and millions of Canadians over the past 4 months with it. We're in an emergency situation, and an emergency situation calls for swift action. And I can speak, very honestly, when I was expressing urgency with respect to helping Canadians as quickly as possible. And my biggest regret from all of this is that fewer young Canadians will benefit from this great service opportunity that we were trying to build in very, very short order. Canadians deserve this. Yeah. Canadians deserve the opportunity, and particularly young Canadians deserve the opportunity to serve their communities. And that was the intention. And I think if you look at the intention of all of the aspects, I think some of the aspects of this situation have been conflated, frankly. But I think if you look at all of them, you look at the intention behind why Minister Morneau was on this trip. Well, because he cares about people and he wanted to help a good charity do good work around the world. Why are we building a CSSG program? Because we care about Canadians and we want to see young people active and purposefully engaged across the country in rebuilding the community that they live in and love. Why are Canadians engaged with the charitable sector, the nonprofit sector, and in community organizations that are serving their towns and cities? Because Canadians care. And our government does too. And that's exactly why we are engaged in trying to our very best during this emergency situation to serve their needs.
But ultimately,
and to create opportunities and programs for youth to be able to serve their communities. And that's the intention. And as I said,
can you shelve ethics because of intention, Mr. Van Koeverden? Like, can you put aside ethics because your heart is in the right place?
Absolutely not. And I don't think that anybody intentionally shelved their ethics. I think that, financially, clearly, Mr. Morneau is in a different situation than your average Canadian. I think that's well known. I don't think we should rake him over the coals for the fact that, he made an error, and he expressed that. And he expressed contrition and regret for that. And every Canadian is disappointed in that oversight, but the reality is it was a mistake. And, it's not about him pocketing money or anything that's being alleged. That's ridiculous. He took part in a humanitarian endeavor. And I think it's really important that we recognize that a humanitarian effort and that intention was a good one.
Okay. Mr. Cooper, I'll get you to respond to that. And then Mr. Angus, I'll get you to as well.
Well, first of all, the We organization issued a statement contradicting the minister. They said that his travel was complimentary. At the end of the day, there was never going to be an invoice. Morneau didn't expect an invoice. He showed total disregard for the Conflict of Interest Act, and he only came forward when he effectively got caught. And with respect to this organization, the We organization, and how in the world they ended up with this nearly $1 billion contribution to their organization defies any explanation. This is an organization that was totally ill-equipped to administer the program, but just out of coincidence, happened to give $300,000 to the Prime Minister's family, provided political and social benefit to the Prime Minister. The same in the case of the finance minister's family.
I think you're conflating different.
Just let him finish it. Don't worry, we'll get everyone
in. And of course, showered his family on illegal vacations. It's time for answers, and that's why we will use every tool in the parliamentary toolbox to get answers, including having the Prime Minister appear before the Finance Committee to tell Canadians exactly what his role was, and to do so under oath, to require him to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Just one quick point of clarification before I turn it over to Mr. Angus. The contract itself, the agreement, the contribution agreement was worth $912 million. We would have been paid up to $43.5 million.
$43.5 million.
Yep, that's what I said.
How convenient for an organization that was in financial trouble. They stood to benefit.
Mr. Angus, last word to you.
Well, we don't know exactly how much we would have been paid because we haven't seen it. We don't know anything about the onboarding costs, all the training fees. I've talked to many people who work at We and formerly worked at We who are very concerned about this. But I think my Liberal colleague captures it perfectly. I don't think the Liberals have ever read the Conflict of Interest Act. Because it's not that Mr. Morneau was trying to pocket money. It was that under the Conflict of Interest Act, these gifts would have been reasonably seen to try to buy influence with them. And I think it succeeded very well because he played a key role in pushing the We plan that wasn't thought out. If the program should have been there to help Canadians. They had 2 months to set it up. No students have been hired. The Liberals have done nothing with this. They have not turned this around. They're crying in the pity pot that people are being mean to them because Bill Morneau's a nice guy. He got caught. He was coming to a committee to explain himself, and then he suddenly discoveed.
But Mr. Van Koeverden's point, I'll get you to respond specifically, is that the intent was not malicious, right? It's like you said, it's not like Minister Morneau was looking to benefit personally.
Well, that's exactly the issue. But this is, I'm sorry, can I just finish?
Yes, of course.
Because the Liberals are misrepresenting this, that somehow we're trying to make Mr. Morneau to be malicious. Mr. Morneau was negligent because it was about the buying of influence of him and the Prime Minister, so that when this project was put on the table, the question was, why were they given an advanced deal that no one else got? It's because they thought these were the great guys. I mean, they flew Mr. Morneau and his family around the world. They were nice people. That's called influence buying. That's why the Conflict of Interest
Not
Act
where the recommendation was
but
from.
the
That's
Liberals,
incorrect. I'm sorry, you're misleading Canadians with that statement.
Mr. Van Koeverden, let him finish, and I'll get you in. Okay.
I would ask my honourable colleague to read the Aga Khan decision that found the Prime Minister guilty. If any of them had bothered to read that, they wouldn't be in the trouble they're in today, but they don't think the law applies to them.
Okay.
That's why they're in trouble.
I'm running out of time, so Mr. Van Koeverden, go ahead.
Thank you very much, and I agree on some statements that I think that Canadians are frustrated, but I would have to come back to the fact that the intention was to serve young people and ensure that they have an opportunity. And I've heard twice now that he was caught, and that's just not accurate. Being called to the Finance Committee, he had a look at his finances and found that there was an error and apologized.
But what if he weren't called?
Apologized proactively and paid back before. That's not called being caught.
Well, he was already under one investigation. When you're under investigation, you're caught. So he would have known that the
not accurate.
Ethics
that's just not true.
Commissioner would have looked into more. This would have come up.
I'm unfortunately out of time. I feel like we could talk for a long time about this, but I very much appreciate the three of you carving out some of your evening for this. Thanks to Adam van Koeverden, Michael Cooper, and Charlie Angus.
We are going to use the tools of Parliament to hold Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau accountable for this avalanche of illegal activity.
I think that Minister Morneau went before committee yesterday. I think also that he explained himself and that he also apologized.
When we have the Minister of Finance, a repeat offender in breaking the Conflict of Interest Act, in accepting a trip worth more than what many Canadians earn as an annual salary, sorry doesn't cut it.
The Ethics Commissioner investigating it, I think, is entirely appropriate. But I continue to have full faith in Minister Morneau, who is one of the most talented colleagues that I work with every day.
Welcome back to Power in Politics. The Conservatives say Finance Minister Bill Morneau has to resign. Morneau admitted yesterday that We Charity covered some of his travel expenses for family trips with the organization in 2017, but it was only yesterday that Morneau repaid that $41,000 in expenses just before he appeared before the Finance Committee to take questions about the agreement reached with the We Charity. How much heat can the minority Liberal government take on this issue? Can Morneau remain in cabinet? It's time for the Power Panel in Denholm, Quebec tonight. David Hurley, partner in the Gandalf Group, host, of course, of the Hurley Burley podcast in Lindsay, Ontario. Jenny Byrne, former top staffer to Prime Minister Stephen Harper and Ontario Premier Doug Ford, now a principal at Jenny Byrne and Associates. Andrew Thompson, Chief of Government Relations for University of Toronto and former Saskatchewan Finance Minister, is with us from Toronto. And Emily Nicolas is a columnist with Le Devoir and co-founder of Quebec Inclusive. She's with us in Montreal. Hi, everybody. Great to see you.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
David, I'll start with you. Do you think there's a resignation coming?
Possibly. I think that, history and research tells us that these kind of things generally require something like that, some pound of flesh, in order for people to be satisfied that there's been accountability involved. Apologies are important, and they're fine, but there also needs to generally be some accountability. So I would not be surprised to see a departure from the government over this issue.
Do you think it's going to be Minister Morneau that departs or somebody else?
Well, I'd flip that over. I'd flip that over to the opposition. I mean, what have they concluded went down here? When they're calling for Morneau's resignation, are they calling for it because of the events of 2 days ago, the $41,000 unpaid thing, or are they calling for it because they have determined that he is the wrongdoer in the contract award, that there is wrongdoing in the contract awarding process, and that he is the wrongdoer in the contract awarding process? Because, absent the latter, I don't know that I would call on Bill Morneau to resign over the relationship with We until we understand who is responsible for initiating this program and directing it to We. That's the piece. And if that's the public service, then there's no wrongdoing. And if that's somebody at the political level, then that's where the responsibility and accountability lies.
So okay, let's throw that over to the opposition. Jenny, what do you think about that?
I'm happy to. So, David, there actually was wrongdoing because it was illegal for Bill Morneau to take a $41,000 vacation paid for by we as the finance minister. That is under Section 11 of the Conflict of Interest Act. That was illegal to begin with. And there are so many things. I think at the very least, Bill Morneau has to resign or get resigned by this government because they have no other way. They have no other way out of this. Or at least to try to manage this issue, which they have done absolutely terribly because they continue to lie, which, as I've said before, one should not lie when they're managing issues. But at the very least, you now have a government who has various points of contacts with the We organization that was going to pay them $42 million to administer a $1 billion program. And now we have a finance minister who has admitted he has taken at least a $41,000 vacation at the behest of we. I've been on a lot of vacations, and I can tell you I have never once paid anywhere close to $41,000.
Do you think, Emily, if
you also weren't building a school?
I wonder on that question if there are more details provided, Emily. If, for example, line by line expenses are presented, because I think the sum of money. I was just sending to my group, an email I got during the first segment from somebody who was talking about how little they get from their pension and how they can't understand how someone could forget $41,000. Do you think if the money is accounted for, that could sway anything in the future?
I think in terms of swaying anything in the future, it very much is a matter of perception right now. We're in the middle of an economic crisis. And even if that wasn't the case, the kind of money that we're talking about touches on a lot of people's, core outrage about social and economic inequalities. And so the fact that you have a Minister of Finance who doesn't even know how much he's spending, that there's this $41,000 missing somewhat. Oh, it's like, he just remembered. That kind of perception stinks. And I think that's what it is about with the scandal. Yes, there's been wrongdoing, but in terms of what's going to sway the public opinion and whether a person or not is going to have to resign, it's very much about this image that we're getting now from the government, the Liberal government, in terms of, a clique of person who's been of people, and then we being very much close to the clique of people in power who have a lot of money. And that's the image that we're getting from the news that we've been getting every day from the scandal. So, and none of that is necessarily illegal. Some of that might be, but even if it was not, there's just the whole air of it doesn't resonate well. It's not something that Canadians want to see. A lot of people who are making not that much money are just, at the very least, rolling their eyes at what we're hearing. And so I think that's what's going to be hard for the Liberals to get away from. And I don't think a resignation might actually change that kind of image that they're painting themselves into. And so it's going to be hard for them to let that image go. And especially for the Liberals, it's an image that's always there, especially if it's a Trudeau in charge. It's an image that's so easy for people to have. And so that's, I think, what's going to stick to the Liberals, regardless of who resigns.
Andrew, I saw you nodding during a lot of those comments.
Well, I think Emily's right. It's not, do I believe Bill Morneau was corrupted by some $40,000 worth of travel expenses? I mean, he's the richest man to ever serve in Parliament. I doubt it. Is there, however, something that's, way too cozy with how the Liberals are operating with some of these outside organizations that they are certainly very close with, and have they blurred the lines? Absolutely. And I think that's the part that will really concern Canadians. I mean, this is like a return of the family compact or the Chateau Clique in Quebec. This is this really tight group of insiders that don't recognize boundaries and seem to believe that the public purse and the private purse and their social good is all combined as long as you've got a good narrative to tie around it. I think at this time, as Emily has said, when Canadians really are struggling, a lot are in dire situations. It's that kind of tomfoolery that they just don't have time for. They want a government that's serious, that's on their side, and is looking out for their interests. And I think all of this runs counter to that narrative. And I would agree also that I don't think it gets fixed by Bill Morneau giving up the post or being fired from it for doing something that's exactly like what Justin Trudeau did with the Aga Khan.
David, if we could, last week we had talked about whether this was resonating. I'm wondering where you think this goes from here. Last week I didn't know at the time that the Kielburgers would end up being before the committee. We didn't even know at the time that Bill Morneau would. And now on top of that, we actually have something which is even more extraordinary. The Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff are going to, at some point, we don't have the date and time yet, appear before the Finance Committee as well. I certainly don't see this running out of oxygen in the coming few days.
No, in fact, in the coming few days, I think it's likely to be very, very active, actually, because whatever action the government's going to take to staunch the bleeding on this issue, they're going to take before Monday. Because the Prime Minister and the Chief of Staff are not going to go to committee on Monday and defend the status quo and then change that 2 days later. And they're not going to want to go there and defend the status quo. So something's going to happen between now and Monday that will likely very significantly change the dynamic on this, I would think.
Jenny, what do you think when you're...
I do want to go back to...
go for it.
Jenny,
yes, you may.
Just before Jenny gets on one of her roles again, I do want to say, though, and I've been out there and I've been saying that this looks bad for the government and that the government needs to answer some questions. But having said that, now that there's opposition people on this panel, I also want to say, you know what the opposition does? They throw all the shit they can at the wall and they see what sticks. And that's what's happening here right now. The testimony of Morneau.
Let him finish. I'll get you right after.
What the opposition's all outraged now about 2 days ago. Well, they were outraged before that happened, and the events of 2 days ago, if Mr. Morneau is not the decision maker on this contract, are not relevant. So the only thing that is relevant in this story to a resignable offense is the government lying about the fact that the program came from the public service and was recommended by the public service. If they're lying about that, somebody's got to go. If they're not, it's just a bunch of smoke.
Okay, Jenny wants to get in. Go for it.
Okay, David, they absolutely are lying on the fact that the public service recommended this. And in fact, you're saying whether Morneau was a decision maker or not. Ian Shugart said in his testimony earlier week, well, this was such a big decision that it couldn't have been done without Bill Morneau. But here are the facts, and this is not mud being thrown against the wall. The facts of this was a $1 billion program being administered by a company, not a charity, by the way, a company, a corporate entity was the one that the government of Canada was planning to go into business with, that employed the finance minister's daughter and paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Prime Minister's wife, mother, and brother. So those are all facts. Whether Liberals want to defend the indefensible, they can continue to do that. But the fact of the matter is, what has happened is senior cabinet ministers broke the law, at least the Conflict of Interest Act in Section 11, in terms of the letter that Pierre Poilievre sent to the Ethics Commissioner earlier today, in terms of accepting gifts from a corporate entity.
Okay, I have time for just a quick comment from both Emily and Andrew. Emily, go ahead.
It's interesting to see the fire going on in this panel. But I do think at the end of the day, regardless of who did what, we're seeing a culture at play. We're seeing a culture of people, because there's basically two scandals, right? There's the scandal of what happened, and there's the scandal of every bystander that was there who didn't raise flag. And there's also the scandal of how, it happened again when the Aga Council, basically this culture of, thinking that Canada's this village, everybody's going to know each other and invite each other at everybody's private islands or whatnot on vacation, and this kind of unawareness that this is not the way things should work and that you should recuse yourself at least when that kind of decisions are being made. And we're not even getting in with this discussion, we're not even getting in we in itself and how as an organization in itself, regardless of the government, it's been problematic as well. And so, and I think that's what's going to be so hard for people to get over is the fact that we're saying not only just an incident, but perhaps an indicator more of a culture. And that's what the image is going to be so hard to get rid of.
Andrew, last word to you.
Well, I think the theatrics that we're seeing come out of Parliament, especially on the Morneau piece, is not helping the opposition and make the case. They need to get back to the real core of the problem here, and that is the tight and cozy relationship in particular between the Prime Minister, his family, and the WE organization. We don't have the facts at this point as to what has happened and why that contract was allowed to go the way it was. As much as there has been some defense by the civil service, there's still a real lack of clarity as to what the approval process was. I think that at its heart is the bigger scandal than whether or not Bill Morneau may have traveled on some free flight or gotten a free hotel room. The big issue here is that coziness, and it's a question as to whether or not the Prime Minister should have been involved in that conversation.
Well, like I said last week, I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this next week as well. Thanks to our power panel this evening. Really appreciate your time and your insights. David Hurley, Jenny Byrne, Andrew Thompson, and Emily Nicola. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.